We are ready for day 3 of Stepdad's 5-day challenge. 5, not 4. I hope you guys are getting value out of this. I hope you're actually doing the challenges, and I look forward to sharing with what we've got today because today's is really the most important topic on the whole map to manhood, the journey to manhood. So let me jump in by sharing my screen and making sure. Hopefully the tech's working. I know I heard the sound, so I think we're good there. Okay. All right. I'm excited to share with you today's challenge. What we do today will probably be easier than yesterday's challenge because it doesn't involve talking to someone else. It's just for you. You can do it by yourself. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily a simple thing or an easy thing, but it can easily be done within 24 hours. And the good news is, when you do it, it's going to lift the burden from you. So I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But before we do that, let's take a quick look at what we talked about on days 1 and 2. On day 1, we looked at self-discipline. That is one of the things that you're at risk of not developing to the extent that would help you function optimally as an adult if you don't have a dad in your life. The challenge action for Monday was to take a list of all of the household tasks that should be done around your home, to list them in a chart like this one that's showing, to put their frequency, their optimal frequency, and then to take those and put those in a chart, a schedule for household chores or the chores chart. That's what mom called it. So that's what I call it. So that was the action from day 1. I hope you've done that. On day 2, the challenge action was to think of someone you may have offended and then call them and apologize. Now, the whole point of this one was to help build a foundation for you so that you can be a better friend. You can develop the social skills, and these are not superficial. These are deep social skills. And they'll help you develop as a person, but they'll help you relate to other people even more so. Again, that is one area that you're at risk of not fully developing if you haven't had a healthy upbringing with mom and dad in the home. So that's why that's there. Now, I want to encourage you to do these daily challenge activities. If you're joining us for the first time on day 3 and you haven't watched day 1 or day 2, then make sure you go back and watch them as soon as this live stream is done. And then do the actions for each one. These actions are based on the book, The Map to Manhood. And I'll tell you more about that later. But those are the things that you're most at risk of not having gotten. Here's the graphic. Um, and that's what I wrote about in the book, The Map to Manhood, because as I reflected back on my experience growing up without a dad, I realized that those were the things that I had the hardest time with. Now, I had some advantages. Sorry, my eyes are itching. I don't even know why. My cat's not here, and I'm allergic to cats. But anyway, um, when I was growing up, I had the benefit of having some positive male role models and a very devoted and hardworking mother. She did a lot to compensate for being one of 2 parents raising 5 kids. And with dad not there, she had to wear both hats and do the best she could. And that's a lot of work. So these actions are designed for you. So as we start day 3, what is today's challenge? Well, today's challenge is something you can do by yourself, but it has the potential to be life-changing. It may be emotionally challenging. It probably will, but I'll share that with you in a little bit. Let me start by setting the stage for today's challenge by telling you about when I wrote the book, The Map to Manhood. I had reached out to a bunch of men and asked if they would be willing to answer some questions. I was doing research to find out beyond my own experiences what commonalities, what differences, what was unique to me, and what is very common for someone that's growing up without their dad. I asked them a series of questions. We talked about their answers and their experiences. And one of the last questions I asked him was, if you were going to give advice to your younger self, or not your younger self, if you were going to give advice to a young man growing up today without his dad, what would it be? And most of them replied with something like this: it's not your fault. Now, that answer surprised me a little bit, mostly because I had asked myself that when I was growing up, a question like this: What's wrong with me that my dad doesn't want to be in my life? One of the biggest challenges that a fatherless young man has to overcome is to learn that his father's absence is not his fault. And that's one of the impacts of not having a dad in your life. And one of the challenges with those questions is that they're often subliminal. In other words, I wasn't even aware that I was asking myself that question. It was just buried in my subconscious. I didn't know that I was questioning my worth and my worthiness because my dad wasn't there. Learning to love is the third path on the map to manhood. And it is one of the biggest obstacles facing a young man who grows up without a dad. The good news is that you can learn to do it. With practice, you can even mature in your ability to feel and express love for those closest to you. Path 3 on the map to manhood is all about developing that skill. Whoops, I scroll this and it all goes, doesn't it? Sorry. uh, let's see. You can see on this graphic the different milestones. So there's different steps as there are on all the paths. The first one is pets. If you don't have a pet, I highly encourage you to get one. You can learn a lot about love by having a pet, assuming you like the pet that you have. If you've ever had a pet that's died and you've had to go through the emotions of losing that pet that was part of your family and part of your life, and you cried about it, well, congratulations. Then you know what it's like to feel love. And that's an important step. And that's an important ability to maturing and preparing yourself to be successful as an adult. So having a pet is one way you can develop that thing, that ability to learn to love. All right. And I've got some actions on there. We're going to focus on one of them today, and it's actually on the learning to love yourself. And we'll get to that in a bit. But there's different things you can do because the biggest challenge that you're going to have is learning how to love yourself, to feel your own value and worth when you're questioning, for heaven's sakes, if my dad doesn't care about me, then something must be wrong with me. And it automatically puts your worth and your value and your ability to love yourself in question. If your dad doesn't love you, and that's sometimes the conclusion we draw when we're going through those emotions. Well, there are many different things you can do to work through those emotions and break through the barriers that you've built as an emotional self-defense. I wrote about a lot of them in the book, The Map to Manhood. In fact, I included the ones that were most helpful to me as I was going through that process of, first of all, recognizing that I questioned my own worth and worthiness because my dad wasn't there, but just being aware of it intellectually and logically realizing that it's, well, dad didn't leave me, he left mom because their marriage fell apart. And you recognize that logically, but and your situation may be different. It may not have been a divorce scenario, but regardless, you can understand that logically, but until you go through the emotions, it's not going to heal. So that brings me to today's challenge. I don't think we're going to be as long today, and that's okay. But this challenge action will help you in ways that you won't get benefits from other. I'm going to stop sharing the screen because I want to tell you a story to set this in to set up today's challenge. Okay. So a few years back, I was attending a 3-day workshop. I've been to a lot of different workshops over the course of my professional career, and more recently, as I've been transitioning into what I'm doing now, which is trying to help you guys. Um, and in the past, they were usually more technical in nature, but this one I went to was kind of unique. It was a 3-day, I can't even remember what they called it, but it was a breakthrough event of some sort. Well, on one of the days that I was there, they invited someone from the audience to come up that had wanted to have a breakthrough. A lady raised her hand and she was invited up on the stage, and she shared with the audience some traumatic emotional experiences that she had had as a young girl, and they were still affecting her today. So the person that's facilitating this has her on the stage. She has her have her eyes closed and remembering it and telling us about it, telling him about it. And as she's going through this, he says he asks her enough questions to where he's got a pretty good situation about what happened. And so do the rest of us, of course, too, as spectators. At that point, he says, now, this little girl that you're seeing yourself back when this happened, this little girl needs to have some help. Someone wants to give her a message. Who is that someone? So this is what he's asking her. And she's standing there with her eyes closed and she says, her grandmother. And he said, okay, invite her grandmother to come and share the message that she needs to hear. And of course, she shares that message that will help that little girl after she's gone through this traumatic experience, which of course was her in the third person. Now, if you're like me, then you might think that was a little too out there. That might be a little too weird for you to go through something like that. And I get that because that's kind of how I was when I was going through this, except that when you're sitting there watching it happen, you realize how powerful it can be. Emotions are very real. And traumatic experiences create emotions that create conclusions in our subconscious mind and our conscious mind about ourselves and about others that may or may not be right. More often than not, they're wrong. But it doesn't matter because we adopt those and we use those. And then we live our lives that way too. It's like I was in a different workshop with a different guy, and he drew the analogy. It's like your 4-year-old self is piloting the plane of your life. How would you like to get on a plane, look in the cockpit and see a 4-year-old sitting in the seat flying the plane? But that's what you're doing with your life in adulthood if you haven't worked through the emotional baggage, the emotional challenges that you have from your childhood. So this exercise today is tied to getting through that. Let me share my screen again. Where to go? I need my mouse first. Come on, mouse. Oh, there we go. Share screen. Back here. Okay. And we go back into here. Sorry about that. I'm going to get better with the tech. Trust me. Here's today's challenge. So I'm not asking you to stand on a stage with your eyes closed and tell everyone in the audience about your childhood trauma. You don't have to do that, so don't worry about that. But I am asking you to be the guide for yourself. Just as I asked those men that were helping me in research for the book, what advice would you give to a young man growing up today without his dad? Well, I want you to do that for yourself. I'm asking you to write a letter to your 4-year-old self. All you need to do is take a piece of paper and a pen and start writing, Dear James, Dear Jimmy, Dear, fill in your name, and start giving yourself the advice you know your 4-year-old self needs. You've had a lot of experience since the time you were 4 years old. So if you look back and you visualize, you imagine yourself at 4 years old, well, guess what? You know a lot of the challenges that that 4-year-old version of yourself is going to be going through. What advice could you give him that would help him navigate that successfully? Now, if that sounds strange to you, I understand it, but do it anyway. When you're writing a letter, remember that you're writing it from the perspective you have now. You know a lot more than you did when you were 4. And I want to make sure that you also communicate how much you love that 4-year-old version of yourself. He needs to feel your love because you know what he's got ahead of him. And as you go through that exercise, it's going to help you a lot. Now, you can do this in the next 24 hours. It's not hard. So please, please do it. It will help you work through the emotions that you have been suppressing because of the challenges you've had in your life. That is today's challenge. I'm going to leave it at that for now, but make sure you come back tomorrow for day 4 and 5 of the challenge. I forgot to do that click there. Make sure you know your 4-year-old self knows that you feel love for him. So tomorrow, it's all about discovering your purpose. And if you do today's exercise, you're going to be well prepared for that. That's a logical and an emotional next step for once you start to break down the emotional barriers you've built up as a self-defense mechanism because your dad's not in your daily life. Once you have a purpose, that gives you direction, that gives you meaning. It makes it a lot easier to go forward. So, record time today, 15 minutes. If you bought the toolbox as part of this 5-day challenge, then hang on because we're going to be in the Zoom for the Q&A next. And if you are interested in that, you can still go and get that. There's 2 more days left, plus the day, plus a lot of the tools in the toolbox are there forever. So you get to use them, and they don't just facilitate or help facilitate this 5-day challenge, though they do, but there's a lot of things that you can refer to again and again and again, and they'll be there forever. And it's $30, 29 bucks now. So if you're interested in that, go to mystepdad.org/toolbox, take a look at that. For everyone else, I'll see you on tomorrow's live stream. Always remember, you can still succeed, even though your dad may not be in your daily life. And you do have a dad that loves you. And we will see you on day 4.